Hello, everyone. Welcome to Tina and Karen Do the Tube. I am Karen.
This is Tina.
Hey.
And today,
Yes. Very special guest for our audience today. We are going to be bringing back our first return guest on the podcast. This is our second time on. He's the host of the Agitator podcast, and he is our good friend and anarchist philosopher. He's Austin. Austin, thank you for coming on our podcast.
Hey, thanks for letting me on. It's looking forward to it.
All right. So we had a little nice pleasantries before this podcast began. We learned that you're promoting yourself to your students.
Yeah, I have on my podcast, I've actually had it where students, I told students in my anatomy and physiology class about a emergency doctor who had a bunch of struggles and trials and tribulations in their workplace, and I had students describe any injustices that the doctor mentioned, including the patient's struggles and the struggles of the doctor being dictated by people above them, and how it's not necessarily best for the patients. And I had students actually talk about those medical injustices as well, and so made it some reality to it rather than just being purely academic.
okay.
Did you get any good info from the students about medical injustice, like something that maybe a doctor had told them that was perhaps wrong? Did you hear anything like that?
Anything that they correct. So let me ask you the question. Let me make sure the question
Verify.
what your
Yeah.
question is, right? So you're saying is there any times that a student actually said like, hey, that's not actually right, what he said?
Well, did you get any feedback from your students? You said that you were playing the podcast with the doctor who basically had been advised by the administration to do wrong things. Did you get any good feedback from the students about
I see what you're
that?
saying.
Yeah.
Absolutely. A lot of them were furious. They were really horrified by what I shared with them. They liked that I actually swore. I said holy fuck and shit in front of the whole classroom. It wasn't me actually saying it. It was me from a year and a half ago saying it. But
it was on the podcast when they heard it. Yeah,
that was on the podcast. Yeah, and they liked that. And it has to do with the fact that if these administrators are looking at human beings as dollar signs and then letting these people die and not getting the proper treatment and going through it so fast, well, I just can't help but swear. I'm like, what the fuck? That's messed up. Right. So so I felt like it was justified in that.
Yeah, taking the human element.
It was a genuine
Medicine.
reaction. It wasn't trying to just put in words for swearing sake, That's one thing they did like. And that's one thing I could take away from my podcast is they like it when I'm angry.
Oh yeah. Well, it shows passion. Yeah.
You're a middle school teacher, right? I think you just switched schools this year.
I did, and it's for high school now. I'm teaching anatomy and physiology. What's interesting is I never taken anatomy and physiology in college, and I'm teaching.
Oh,
what really? So, how'd that come to be?
I don't know. I got a degree in biology and whatnot. So they kind of assume like, oh, you have something in biology. Maybe it's because you have something in anatomy and physiology and you can just job fund and do that. No, I didn't have that. So I'm following along with a veteran teacher and kind of flying the seat of my pants.
Yeah.
But it's amazing how much you can it's amazing how much you feel like maybe you can pick up just by on the job training as opposed to sitting in a classroom row, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I really think the best job training for a teacher is really doing the job itself. And a lot of things in life is that way, of actually being in the environment itself rather than being in a separate environment that's more sterile for learning. The only way that I feel like that's good is in a science environment where you're trying to control variables is to learn that way. But other ways, if it's something more artistic, it's better to just jump in and mess around with it. Especially with humans. Humans are dealing with humans is an art.
Well, actually, that's actually kind of a good segue into our main topic about anarchism, because you just pointed out that some of the best training you got, some of the best education, like how to be an educator and the topic of physiology, was best done in person with a more experienced teacher. So that goes back into maybe the idea of hierarchy between the teacher and the students. So like, do you feel like maybe like the old school format of we need just basically a lecturer and an audience is perhaps not the best way of doing most education today?
Or
Absolutely.
does it depend on age too?
Oh, that's another good question too.
Two things. So there's two questions about it. Is basically what you're saying is there an age that is appropriate to be able to just sit there and lecture? And then the other one is that even a good model itself?
Right.
So two things. The first question about when is it a good age? It depends on really, again, like anything else in life, it's a muscle to be able to sit down. So if you're older, you can handle it a little bit longer. But for me, it's usually around 10 minutes before they have to do something. And the fact, and they got to do something. I think that also applies to adults, that you can't just simply sit there and absorb everything passively. You can do a little bit, but studies have shown that you need to be doing something with it. You're not going to be, it's not going to, you either if you don't use it, you lose it. So to me, a lot of learning is you're constructing your understanding. And by constructing your understanding, that's by definition more active. So it's kind of medieval to be able to be like, oh, I'm the guy that has filling these empty vessels of information and stuff them in. Because like, honestly, you're just training kids to do things they don't want to do. We're trying to inspire them to do things they want to do. Right. And I think that part of anarchism is that. Is they inspire things to do things you want to do rather than being told or being coerced or oppressed to do something you don't want to do.
Have you ever heard any of the ideas about how the way we structure classrooms is to mimic a factory?
Kinda, yeah. It makes sense. I think it more closely resembles a prison, to be quite honest. Be frank.
Wow.
You know, a lot of students, if they get in trouble and suspended a lot of times and whatnot, and they're called the troublemakers who don't fit in, what do you do with those people? Well, in our system, you suspend them, they don't go to school, and then they go into a cycle of like, oh, I'm not going to go to school because I already missed all this. And then they go and be desperate, and then they go and do crimes that they shouldn't do, and then go to prison. And so I have that actually in another podcast of mine where I talked to somebody who was a juvenile detention facility. And we talked about it as school systems kind of as a preparation for that, rather than actually a
school systems a preparation for prison. Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so I think it is now, and especially it disproportionately affects people of color. They definitely get more suspensions, they get labeled as IEPs, individual learning plans, which is basically a way of saying like, yeah, I don't think you can fit in the normal population. And so there's a lot of systemic racism in that sense.
Could you
now?
I'll let you go, Tina.
Are we talking about like a Epstein style prison or like a state penitentiary style prison here?
Epstein style.
What was your first prison? What was it?
An Epstein style like prison.
I don't even know what he's trying to make out of that.
Where you go in from like 9 to 5 and then go back home.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I guess it's the only difference. It's temporary. So, it's not you're not actually like charged with anything. I don't know. So either way.
I'm sorry. I really was curious. Did you say like individual learning program? What was it?
Individual education plans.
Yeah. Could you expand on that for our audience who may not know what that is?
Yeah,
what is that?
Yeah. Those are individual education plans were developed in the early 90s, part of the ADA, American Disabilities Act, where you try to get people who are tested as deficient in some areas, but they'll put them in the population instead of segregating them, put them in the population. And so sometimes what happens is let's say you teach them, you're testing for English, and and see if they have a language deficit. But it turns out they don't have this is not their first language.
Right.
There's oftentimes they've been mislabeled that way. And so that's an injustice there. And that hurts their confidence, which could send them down to the road of like, the penitentiary road is what I'm fearful of it.
Yeah.
And so, but it's also, there's a lot of good to it. Be able to, because everybody has unique needs. And when it is done correctly, I really appreciate having an IEP for the students who really need that extra help.
Right.
Because otherwise I'd be leading the blind. And I appreciate the special ed teachers doing that.
Mm-hmm.
But that being said, there are cracks in there. And I wouldn't be saying that if it wasn't true.
So it sounds like you do actually appreciate the program and just not implemented the right way.
Yeah. And anything needs to get better. There's ways we are all getting better at it. But it doesn't happen that often from what I've seen, but it's enough that it's a significant thing that people studied it.
Yeah. And it doesn't even just go towards Spanish in English, which is, I'm assuming, what the majority of the kids are who are put into the program. I actually follow a YouTuber who grew up in Quebec, and he was English. And because he was English and everyone in Quebec is French, they considered him learning disabled for the majority of his adolescence years, which is, it's silly, but yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
What do you do about that? A bilingual society.
In an ideal situation, it was for something like that, especially in a country where it's here, there's not really a national language. And so there's really, it requires a big thing called extra time and resources to be able to curtail to those kids' needs. And we just with how revenues are raised and how things are organized currently without much teacher input at all, I don't see things really changing.
I was going to ask, since we were on the topic of prisons, where you see prisons fitting within an anarchist system.
Yeah.
Do they have
okay. That's a good question, Tina. I don't want to. Can I just ask one more question about education? Because then we'll move on to the meat of the discussion, anarchism, about education. Because you're our first teacher on the podcast, so I'm curious. Did you do virtual learning the last year for the pandemic? I'm sure. What was your experience with virtual teaching, and what do you think the future of it is going forward? And then once we get through that, then we can move totally into anarchism. So,
sure. So like you were saying about earlier, do you think the idea of lecturing is kind of going out of style?
Yeah.
Well, this really put the nail in the coffin, because really all you can do on the internet, especially as a science teacher, is lecture. And so it was a nail in the coffin and making me realize, you know what? We actually have to, a teacher is important enough and students have to be actually in the classroom to do things that are hands-on in science. And so it was awful. It really made me take a break and take a step back and think about, is this really what I signed up to do? And so I took a break, and then I decided to go back. And it just really provided evidence that the idea of a lecturer sitting in front of a classroom taking notes is just outdated. It's just outdated by 500 years.
Right. Okay, good. Thank you. Okay, sorry, Tina. I didn't mean to cut you off like that.
No worries.
Yeah, I just wanted to conclude. Okay, so now that we've more or less covered education from your point of view, now we can really get into the meat, the nitty and gritty, the meat of this conversation, which is anarchism, because that's unique to you, because we haven't had another anarchist on our podcast. So I'm very curious. So last time we talked with you, you described yourself as an anarcho-syndicalist. Do you still see yourself that way, or has it changed?
I mean, for the most part, for me, it's about the same, but I'm already used to thinking of anarcho-communism, but It's really kind of pretty similar in the sense of like having as more workers are in control of what's going on, the happier everybody will be, and you don't need bosses. And I've talked to I've been kind of skeptical if we can, and really the strategy different. It's a strategy thing for me. The syndicalist is more committed to change through the workplace through unions. So whereas a communist, anarcho-communist, where I'm kind of going at, or better yet, it's called the Libertarian Socialist, or an anarchist in a traditional sense. For me, it's the totally overthrow of the system of having hierarchy and bosses, rather than try to negotiate them and then through some evolution of time, eventually they'll come around, because history doesn't go that way. It's usually there's a lot of preparation involved, and then it snaps and things change.
Okay.
And over a relatively short time.
Well, just the mere fact that you're no longer anarcho-syndicalist ruins about half my questions. Fuck. No. It's funny. Okay.
Karen, we were talking last week because you brought up the idea about hierarchy, and I think you said that hierarchy is inherent, right, throughout human civilization. So.
Right. I think hierarchy is natural. Do you share that opinion?
No. I believe in the idea, very simply, that humans are as happy as they can be when they're as free as they can be, without inhibiting the rights of other people's freedom. So meaning that you do whatever you want, but as long as it doesn't hurt other people and respect their right as a person. But that doesn't mean, that also goes to hierarchy and along with that. It doesn't mean that I guess I'm losing my train of thought there.
No,
but
it's okay.
Anyway, I don't think it's inherent at all. I'm looking at back just in history, most of human history, it wasn't like that through hunters and gatherer societies. But to be even fair too, let's say maybe the ultimate thing of humanities, we fight. It's a struggle of competition. Maybe that's what you're kind of going with? Is that the point?
No, I actually think that.
Okay.
Well, I mean, I do agree that the majority of human history is without hierarchy, but the majority of human history is a bunch of tribes like surviving, hunting and gathering. When you see civilization blossom, that's when you see hierarchies really appear. So I think that maybe I do think it's natural, but like the idea that like hierarchy, I don't think it is a net good or a net negative. Really, I don't. I just don't think that like a society that is 100% egalitarian is possible. And if it were possible, it's only through extreme tyranny.
So there was a time that actually this happened for a few years. It was in Spain,
Catalonia
Spanish Civil War.
Yeah.
And so that happened. And the only reason why that fell through, it was because of the combined forces of the communists, the fascists, and the like republics like the United States and United Kingdom. And the combined efforts of those crushed the revolution that was in Catalonia.
Right. But that was actually one of the questions I was going to bring up later on. But now that since you bring up Catalonia, I would say so. One of the main criticisms of anarchism is that it is neither scalable or durable, meaning that anarchism can't grow beyond a certain number of members, nor can it withstand internal or external threats for long periods of time. Like I said, for instance, the chief success stories of anarchism have been the Paris Commune and Catalonia in Spain, but both of these anarchist revolutions failed within a span of not years, but just a few months.
I would say argue with Catalonia was longer than that.
Well, I mean, like there was a period about 3 years where they were existing during the Spanish Civil War, but nonetheless, they still were squashed by the fascists.
Right. And so because of the combined forces, not because of any fault, like as far as like the system itself being unsustainable. It wasn't because of that. It was the fact that, people didn't like the idea of it, and I want to team up and crush them. And so, so yeah, and it even existed in our hometown on the Key Peninsula.
Yeah.
It actually.
We're not even going to talk about Chaz. We're going to move on to the home, Washington.
Yeah, exactly.
The original, anarchist colony in Washington.
Can we bring up Chaz later?
Sure, I'm all right with Chaz later.
All right, okay, but let's talk about home.
But yeah, it's about it was called originally the Home Mutual Association in our hometown, near our hometown anyway. And
now we're all of the Key Peninsula here. It's our hometown.
Yeah, and so they set it up as a community where what you can do is you can pay a fee and to go into this community that was set up as a home mutual association, pay the fee to be able to use the materials to build your home, roads or whatever have you, and then and you just go on society. And this existed for 20, 25 years or whatnot. And then eventually there was a little bit of debates about, hey, should we be naked or not all the time?
The nudist colony.
I didn't know that part.
And then that became a huge debate, and all the people in Tacoma, in the town nearby, were like, oh my God, these people are crazy. What's up with them? Trying to have independence and freedom, and they're being naked all at the same time. We can't have that.
So the nudity ruined
it. Yeah. And so newspapers were talking about how this difference is what split them up. But really what happened was when I did dig a little deeper, that the state cracked down on the community because they said, quote, this is avoiding taxes, and so then they crush the community, and so it's by force yet again, and so it just keeps going. Like there's you can go and talk about maybe not perfect any societies that are big scale as anarchism, because there is some tidbits of that feeling everywhere in a lot of places. I can think of another places, even in Athens, kind of reflected a little bit of anarchism and the Athenian democracy there, in the sense there was no bosses in that sense. Even some of these cooperatives reflect some of that anarchist principle of having no bosses. And so
Madrigal
out of Spain,
Yep, and that was a pretty big one. That has the issues as well. It's not what I would call like non-hierarchy system, but what it definitely is a huge step of choosing their bosses, and it's really sustainable. It's really large. It's like 70 the company is like, it just sells retail stuff, but it's like 70 different countries around the world, and it's been in business for like 60 years. So it's
going off of the Madrigal example, like, do you picture the anarchist future being a market competition between co-ops, or do you vision like a different mode of operation where profit is not the chief mode of the economy?
That's a great question. So this becomes a question to me. It's like, do you get rid of money at that point if you have no hierarchy? Is there a need for it? Well, it is a kind of a technical question for me. I think it becomes like, if you get rid of the bosses, does that mean there's no profit? Does that mean it kind of falls from, it's like more of a follow-up of a technicality. So I don't have a crystal ball to tell you what it is. I just know that I don't see why it can't still exist with a profit, as long as the fruits of those labors are given to the workers rather than some fat cat in their desk.
So you're more of a market socialist than a communist.
Yeah, I guess,
because you actually agree with the idea of profit as long as the business is mutually owned by the workers.
Yeah, exactly. It's not, so I don't think the idea, I mean, there should be a sense of a basic needs met, just basic needs to be able to work in the first place, just on like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I do believe in some things that you should just have, like healthcare, please feel safe, have food in your belly, things that you just have. But then there's other things that are beyond basic needs that humans just want. And so that's where markets come in. But also, to me, it's not in the sense of markets in the sense that you sell yourself, but you're selling something and you're producing something and you're selling it. Because if you're just working for a wage in what we call a market, what are you really selling? You're selling yourself. And so that's literally a sellout. And so, and that ruins the humanity of that person. And Adam Smith actually talked about that. Talked about literally how it can make the human as stupid and ignorant as they possibly can. And I use those quotes.
It's interesting you brought up Adam.
And this guy celebrated by like, oh, he's an economic wizard. He should,
founder of modern capitalism.
Yeah.
So since you brought up Adam Smith, I was gonna this is a quick. Who do you see as like the chief philosophers who sort of guided you to your philosophy that you have now? Like, who gave you the most influence?
A few people. One which is Noam Chomsky. The other ones are older. Emma Goldman was a big one. She was a anarchist in the early 20th century. Let's see. Peter Kopernikan.
I've heard of him.
Let's see here.
All right.
Mikhail Buchanan.
I don't know him. That sounds too German for me.
I think I'm saying it wrong. But I think it's some Russian dude.
Oh, okay. Well, that's even worse. No, just kidding.
Okay. I think that's about it for right now. I can think off the top of my head, but there's let's see.
But Noam Chomsky is probably your chief guiding philosopher. Yeah,
I've learned a lot from him. I don't agree with him 100%. About 85% of issues I agree with. Lately, he's been saying some things about vaccines that are a little bit for an eyebrow raise for me, about segregating people.
I was curious about that. Tina and I talked about this before we even got into the podcast. I'm glad you brought it up. What do you make of Noam Chomsky's statement that the unvaccinated should starve?
Yeah, I think it's gotten a little too far.
Yeah, that's probably too far.
I think it's a little too far in the sense of like he tries to make an argument about how it's like trying to follow a stop sign to protect people from other people. But like you said, like how are they supposed to eat? They don't care. They eat. He says go figure it out, and I think that's pretty heartless. But the question is then it's like it's easy to talk poo-poo about him and what his beliefs are, but what's a alternative? For me, you can get a lot more bees with honey than you can with fire. And so I would incentivize these people. If you want to get a vaccine, if you're going to get a vaccine, great. You get $3,000. Here's $3,000.
Okay.
Stimulus, and everybody gets a stimulus, including you and I. And so if everybody got $3,000, especially with the housing crisis, where on average $4,000 per person is behind their rent.
So that $3,000 is meaningless to them, really.
Well, then I would argue.
No, it would be. Wouldn't it be basically paying down debt that you would still be in debt?
No, it would be. I would actually make it so if it's $4,000, maybe even $4,000, and then they would pay. They would cover the rent that they've been racking up, and so it's been no fault of their own. It's the pandemic.
That was the number one thing they showed from all the stimulus was that most people use their stimulus to pay down debt.
Right? That is true. Yeah. So that's interesting. You brought up the whole idea of rent. So as a anarcho-communist, what is your whole philosophy of landlords?
It goes back to no hierarchies or bosses. I wouldn't have a landlord. I would say a strategy could be just somehow kicking them out. You would
kicking them out. Wait.
Some draft.
Sorry, what'd you say?
Kick out the landlords off the whatever they own. You're going to transfer it to the actual tenants itself.
Okay.
Because they know best on how to organize and take care of property because they live there. And so rather as a landlord, that happens sometimes, but really the best people are the people themselves. And I just think that it's another way you can twist people's arms. And it's another way of coercion, having a landlord that you have to have the landlord check on you on instantly all the time, no matter what. No, not really any regulations unless there was a stratus that's involved. Like there is this little stratus here in week 1 here in Washington where you get like a day's notice before a landlord comes in. But without that, they can run your life if they really wanted to, and they don't give a shit. And so have you
ever had any personal experiences with bad landlords, or are you a homeowner?
Or maybe on your podcast, perhaps.
I haven't. I would be a really great one to have on my podcast to talk about should there a landlord even exist, the position even exist. I would be really interested to do that. The closest I've gotten to that was talking to a movie producer.
Oh wow!
And I talked to the movie producer about how do you really need, maybe the only reason why you need a movie producer is because we're living in a system that would require it institutionally, but not like fundamentally to complete a movie.
Yeah, fuck movies.
And so anyway, yeah. So anyway,
I want Leonardo DiCaprio producing my movie.
So that goes back to my point about the landlord.
Yes.
Is it only necessary because of a system that we live in? It makes it necessary. You can look at an area called Rojava. It's in Syria. They don't have any landlords there either. And they did a pretty successful job fighting off ISIS and whatnot. And they have the communities themselves own the communities, and they make decisions and councils and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, housing is an interesting one because in a sense, it acts as personal property, but also can be considered private property when you get big, large, housing firms buying up, houses.
That's good. But first, for the layperson, Austin, could you explain the difference between personal property and private property?
Personal property for me is like, it's like I own my computer. It's something to me. It's like, this is how I think of personal property. If I got a similar copy of something and I switched it with something that I own and I don't recognize it, that's my personal property because it matters to me. Like my artwork, I think they're personal property because you can get the same copy of it, but it's not the same. It is wrong to me.
Okay.
For me, if I replace my $50 with another $50, I don't care. It's exactly the same thing. So to me, that's private. At that point, that's private property.
So personal property is the property you recognize has value to you and no one else. Private property would be value to anyone, regardless of whether it's like sentimental. Is that it?
It's a little personal. Is a little bit, yeah. It has that emotional piece to it.
Okay.
And that seems more real. In the private part, it can be a lot of things. To me, it's a really big catch-all term. But for the most part, it's less emotion attached to it. It's not as yours in the sake of like if you replace it, it still feels like you can use it. Like a matter of fact, one thing that could be private property for me is if somebody takes my PS4 and replaces it with another PS4, I'm not going to care because it looks like it has all my games on it. If it has all my games on it, I don't care at that point. It's not a personal property. It just becomes private property. And again, I could be fucking this up, but that's just how I rationalize those two. Again, you can go to me you can even go private property is again, maybe you need to have, it's a hierarchy involved with it. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I'm not exactly a political scientist. Yeah. All I know is what personal property is, and you have to have that emotional tie to it. It's unique to you.
So my understanding of private
property is not.
My understanding of private property is that the difference between personal property and private property is that private property can be used for economic gain.
Like
So-
as a commodity, right?
It's something like, for instance, like my toothbrush serves me no economic gain, versus my car, which I could actually use as an Uber driver, becomes private property. It's a means of production sort of thing.
Yeah, I never really thought about that. So
Okay. All right. How do you define the state? This is a big
Interest-
question asked the
interesting
anarchists
enough.
because there's a lot of different philosophies as to what the state
Yeah.
actually is.
Yeah, interesting enough. For me, you can go back to the founding of the United States in the presidential debates, the continental debates. I'm not talking about. I'm talking about the straight debates itself. Like, instead of the notes and whatnot, the notes on the actual debates are very clear of what the purpose of a state is. And what they said, what James Madison said, was the purpose of this government is to, quote, protect the minority of the opulence against the majority. And you can interpret that pretty well, pretty straightforward. I think you want to protect private property against the majority, because the fear is, and this is the truth, that if people had the right to vote on anything, they would take the property from the rich and give it to themselves.
Right. Pure democracy is 2 wolves and 1 sheep vote on what's for dinner.
Yeah. So anyway, so that's what their biggest fear was. Their fear was that, like, oh man, and who are these people who are the minority of the opulent? Well, it's also the people who are writing this constitution up. They are the slave owners. They're the merchants and manufacturers. So of course they want their peculiarities served. And so of course they do that. And so that is kind of the purpose of government, I think, is to protect the rights, quote, rights of property, meaning rights to own other people or own, be an owner.
So it seems like Tina wants to ask something.
Oh, I was just gonna say it seemed like, at least early on, and after the U.S. was founded, and the Constitution was really written for people that were the landowners rather than the people that worked the land, right?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, they actually decried that in discussions in these debates, that like they felt like they were going to be hypocrites. Like, hey, we've been talking about democracy throughout the revolution, and now we're going back on it a little bit, kind of making democracy more tepid, because you don't want the horde to take over, so to speak, is what their fear was. Again, what is this horde they're talking about? Regular people wanting a decent shot at life? Call me a part of that horde. And so, matter of fact, what's interesting about that is Aristotle found the same problem 2,000 years earlier about if you have a income inequality that's so massive, what would happen if they implemented a democracy? And he came to the same conclusion, that they would take their power to take the money from the rich.
Right.
And so what the question is what is the solution? What is a solution to something like this? Well, there's two. The first one is Aristotle said, instead of what we should do is to prevent this thing from happening, is having an equal opportunities for everybody, or basically a welfare state of some sort. Everybody has some basic needs set, that if you do have these basic needs set, and having, in my opinion, a say in the workplace, an equal say in the workplace, this problem wouldn't arise as much. And so because there would be less dissatisfaction, because things were relatively, again, there's always going to be inequality, but relatively equal. Now, James Madison had the exact opposite solution. He said, let's get rid of democracy. Let's get less of it. And so, and stop this impulse that people have of, wanting more freedoms, more rights, and better quality of life.
Well, yeah, because was the original 13 states that couldn't seem to agree on a lot of different things, and so they would like set like overwhelming tariffs on each other, and while the federal state needed money to pay off war debts, and so they had to get all the most influential people at the time to come together and kind of set something up so that the original popular governments that were instated didn't have as much power.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I think they did justify like, hey, we need to have this create amazing this tax system, federal taxes to pay for our war that we had with England at the time. So to me, it's like, okay, you could raise taxes, but who are you going to raise the taxes on? Well, they mostly did to average people. Now, if you raise taxes onto slave owners and stuff, that would have been that could have paid for the war debts, but that would have hurt the masters of mankind, wouldn't it?
Well, I know they would approach that problem later on.
Well, it's interesting you brought up Aristotle because in Plato's Republic, he ranks 7 different forms of government, and he ranks democracy as the lowest form of government. Essentially, his fear of democracy is that people would vote for more freedoms and less responsibilities over time. So
but he also said, go ahead.
Oh, no. But like that is the great fear that like Plato and had with democracy, is that it would inevitably lead to a tyranny because you basically would vote the guy in who basically said, I'm going to give you all your freedoms, all your rights, all your hordes, I guess, and you won't have any responsibility for it. And that will lead to chaos, that wouldn't lead to tyranny. So the idea of democracy is that the people would vote for more freedoms, less responsibilities, which would lead to chaos, and a tyrant would actually reign in its place.
I don't know if they would say less responsibilities, maybe a different sense of accountability. But then he's also on top of that, Plato, or is it whatever who wrote the Republic? He also said
Plato.
That the philosopher king is the best guy.
Yes.
And you need some dude that is just super special, super enlightened.
Yeah, that was Plato's
the best dude.
That was Plato's top form of government, was the aristocracy, governed by the best, philosopher kings.
And so I think that is a pipe dream. It's like saying I'm going to wait for the Messiah to come, and he's going to come around and he's going to fix everything. It ain't going to ever come, man. And if he does, it's for like a blink.
But like Plato's main criticism of democracy, what do you think about it? The idea that people will forever vote for more freedoms and less responsibilities. Because imagine you basically said, I want to be able to do whatever I want, and I don't want to have to provide for myself. I want things provided to me, right? So less responsibilities, more freedoms. That was the fear of Plato.
This is what I would say. If you have more freedom, and people have more freedoms, they actually have more responsibilities to themselves and to each other. And so I think you can't decouple them. I think they're actually pretty much linked.
Well, I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, because there's the old quote that like property that is owned by everyone is cared for by no one, because you assume everyone else is going to take care of it.
That just doesn't happen.
Well, hold up. I want to bring up this amusing anecdote. Karl Marx's grave is private property. Adam Smith is buried in a public graveyard. The irony being that if you go to Adam Smith's grave site, it's trashed. It's garbage. You go to Karl Marx's grave site, it's like a shrine. It's like a holy ground. That's the great irony I always found, is Karl Marx is buried in a private graveyard where people privately take care of it. Adam Smith buried in a public graveyard, and no one would ever possibly want to go there.
And like I said, go ahead.
But no, just the idea that like that property that is owned by everyone is cared for by no one.
So this is what I would say. I would say when you're talking about the no one part, you're really just private property. There is a part of ownership, right? Can we agree upon that?
Yeah.
If you have so the other one wasn't privately owned at all. The other one wasn't. And so the reason why it would, to me, is get trashed is very simple. You take care of your home less, in my experience, if I don't own it. I just don't.
Right, yeah. A tenant wouldn't care
but
as
if
much
I
as a
own
landlord.
it, but if I own
yeah.
my house,
Yeah.
I take care of it better.
Absolutely.
So that what I'm suggesting is the workers themselves are owning it, not sharing it, owning it. And so therefore they would then have that more responsibility, and therefore more freedom, because they have to do whatever they want with it, but they have the responsibility to help each other, to make sure it doesn't inflict harm to other people, because that wouldn't help the overall organization in the long run.
Right. I don't know if it's okay with you guys. I want to take a brief intermission so I can refill my drink.
Go for it.
Okay. We'll take a quick pause. Be right back.
So how's this school year been?
It's been better? Really good. It's been a really good year. I've been having a lot of fun. I have as more autonomy than I've ever had before. I'm working harder, but I'm liking it more.
Yeah.
And
sounds like the Zoom stuff was kind of a bit of a burnout for.
No, it was a non-starter. If we get to that point again, I don't even know. Like, I'll
really
take a break again if I have to. It's just unbearable to me. Well, maybe I feel different if it was an English teacher where I can read stuff in front of a screen. But if you're a science teacher doing the labs and stuff, good luck doing it in front of a computer. Good luck.
Did you do the experiments yourself and you had to show them? Or
yeah, I had to do the experiments themselves and show it to them. Dang. And like record it and stuff.
Yeah, that doesn't sound fun at all. How did you get into the not the anarchy, but your physiology thing? Was it you just?
I just walked into it. I literally, all they knew was that I did biology, and I think what they did is they like did the leap of like, oh, you did biology. I assume you did anatomy and physiology, right? Never even asking me, and so I didn't figure out that I was teaching anatomy and physiology until a week before school started. So,
holy moly!
Yeah, it was a shock. It's been okay to learn how to teach it. It's not my favorite right now because I've never even taught it before, but I'm sure after I got some practice, I'll like it more.
Okay, so you come into like it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I missed that part of the conversation. Like, normally when I break for intermission, Tina has no one to talk to, so we just basically break. There was a part of the conversation I missed. All right, but the last thing we were talking about before we broke was the idea that, like, workers need a sense of ownership over their work, really.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
But this is actually one of my curious... Because my experience with workers, a lot of them don't actually want a bigger role in their company. They just want to be paid more. What percentage of workers do you think want a sense of ownership versus how many workers would rather just make a living wage and not have a sense of ownership?
I think it's more than you think. I think and Marx has talked about it too, about the idea of alienation. And even Adam Smith talked about doing the same thing over and over again, make somebody as stupid as possible. Absolutely. I think there is a yearning that's just below the surface for that. Now, the other question is you're talking about how do we not want to have these responsibilities, hold people accountable? And so I would say with like a problem with the system right now is that fact that there is a thing called limited liability. And if you own enough shares and whatnot, or an owner, you can get away with any decision you make and you don't get any problems with it.
That's true.
And to me, I'm actually more in favor of accountability in that sense. If it goes to tribal council, like Survivor style, if they decide that's on their prerogative. I don't know if I would go that far extreme. I would try to do some probation stuff ahead of time, but I'm not saying that that can't happen. And maybe in an extreme case, if somebody's being really infringing the freedoms of other people, maybe you could go that extreme.
Now, Tina, you're actually the outlier in this group because you actually are an employer, not an employee. Do you get a sense from your this is a question directed towards Tina, sorry. Do you get a sense from your workers that they would rather have more say in how things are done, or would they rather just make more money?
This came up recently when Zach asked for a raise, even after being told that they'd be getting substantial bonuses.
Not substantial enough. I haven't made one fucking more cent. And I worked there 3 years ago. I want a piece of the pie, man.
I hear you. I do think I definitely try very hard, probably more than my business. I did just say that, but I think Lane listens too. But I do, since I work with them day to day more throughout the day than he does, I do try to listen to them. And I think a lot of the advice they've given on running certain things has definitely helped workflow in just this year. So they would say I'm probably the nicest boss they've ever had, but
that's actually.
But even if you're the nicest, even if you're the nicest boss, they're even naturally asking and advising you to do
still,
things.
yes, they're still.
So in other words, they still want to be in more control of what's going to happen in the company, and they can want more money. They want both.
All right, I think I'll bridge the gaps here because actually, I'm actually the biggest proponent of Tina's style, because I think the three of us can all agree none of us want Jeff Bezos. Like a world without Jeff Bezos, not the man himself, but the idea of him, is better. More small companies, more communal ownership. It doesn't. I don't particularly care if there's a manager-worker hierarchy as long as it's small scale, because I think that communities are made through small scale, not large scale. The problem with Amazon, companies like Amazon, is that you have workers in Amazon who are so detached from their work that they are just cogs. And that is a problem.
That's the alienated labor.
That's the alienation. I think that actually is something that's really concerning. That's something that I think all three of us can agree on, I hope.
Absolutely. I think it gets even more extreme in the sense that it's another form of oppression like slavery. Let's take that extreme example. If you get all your income from one place, all the resources come from one place, and you get their food from that place, such as Amazon, buying from Amazon Prime, all the stuff from there. How is that not a different form of oppression like slavery?
That's a good point. Tina?
I mean,
it's a monopoly is what it is. It's the problem.
Slavery with liquidity.
Well, it's
my thing is I would say it is a part of the monopoly, yes, but to me it's also equally, if not bigger, is the fact that how rigid this hierarchy is.
So talking about monopoly for a second, when there is a monopoly, that's when we can agree. Once again, all three have agreed that workers can feel very disenfranchised and completely without power in their lives because they are subject to this one employer that does things one way, and there's no alternative. And that's my fear, is that Amazon is going to eat out more and more competition as time goes on. And we're going to have less and less. It's basically everything's going to be Amazon and Walmart in 20 years. And that's a great fear. But
it's kind of amazing the companies that last for more than 100 years, though, too.
What company? Is it IBM? Has that been around for 100 years? I don't know.
I'm thinking Coca-Cola.
I love Coca-Cola. Yeah.
But to me, it's when it comes down to alleviating a little bit of that struggle, because I think it's the jury's out for me personally still about how much of a monopoly is still a thing. It doesn't matter if you have a monopoly, if you're the owners, if there's no ownership class, I'm going to go on the fence that probably it does matter in the sense that you probably shouldn't have that's anything that big. and it's just unnaturally, because usually things are that big in monopoly are being supported by the state. And goes
true.
back to what we were talking about earlier, that the state is meant not for you and me, the Joe Blow, but to protect the interests of the minority of the opulent.
Well, that's very true. I would agree with that, especially just the idea that, like, as a company, let's say Amazon got to where they were naturally. Let's say that, just hypothetically, they were the best. What are they going to do to stay in power? They're going to leverage the government to basically squash anyone who might pose a threat to them, and then they're elevated forever. And that benefits Jeff Bezos. It benefits his shareholders, but doesn't benefit anyone else in society. So I would agree with that too, because like I want to believe in the system enough to say that, like, let's say Amazon and Jeff Bezos earned it properly. But once they get into that position, they'll do whatever they can to stay in that position, even if it means using the full force of the government to squash every competition.
Yeah. And so it comes to me, I guess my question goes back to, is just in general, throwing it out there, is, are these companies naturally that big without the state? If there wasn't a state involved, would there be monopolies this size? I don't know.
That's a good question.
I don't know. I don't have an answer. All I'm saying is monopolies, in of itself coming from, I don't know. I guess what I'm just saying is monopolies are usually rigged, and like you said, and everybody kind of knows it, and it's usually it's co-opted through the state. This usually happens, and so it's at multiple levels of hierarchy that want to protect their interests. Because, yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on accelerationism?
Meaning that we that if we point out if things are going to get so much worse, that the reason why when things get worse, we're actually going to get better at the end. Is that what you're saying?
The idea is the thought that
I'm curious too.
The apocalypse will occur before capitalism will end. That famous phrase, and that since it doesn't seem like there is any end to capitalism, we should just accelerate capitalism to its max, so that it will kind of just deconstruct itself.
So I would say in 1855, were people talking about a world that doesn't have slavery? 10 years before. They weren't talking about it. They were just.
Well, there was talk about it. Let's not just give them complete no notion. Abolition was a big movement,
but it wasn't.
It wasn't common.
A world after it.
Yeah, they didn't envision a world without it. Yeah.
So that's what I'm saying with capitalism is maybe we're at that edge there. That it's hard for us to imagine the world after it. And for me personally, I think if we're going to think of a world of apocalypse, it would be, for me, climate change. And I think at this rate, especially how much we pollute, and then side question is if the workers were in control of these companies, would they pollute as much into their environment? That's a side question. But the truth is if we don't do anything, we're gonna have hurricanes or droughts like the world has never seen. 2100, floods, tornadoes, hurricane. It goes on and on and on. And I think the world is going to end that way, and it could end before capital ends, because capitalism contributed to that. Because capitalism doesn't account for things called systemic risk, such as climate change. Because if they did consider it, then they would be out of the job. They would be undercut by the competition, and they're out, and they can't have that. So they can't. So I really think capitalism is sealing the deal as far as climate change is concerned. It's not good.
It's kind of interesting. Like, we brought up slavery and how people didn't have a great idea of what the world would look like without slavery, but then you go back to kind of like wage slavery and changing kind of like the definition of what we consider, or not explicitly consider a slave, but contorting that. And so just wondering, like, well, capitalism within the next 100 years, it may look the same but have slightly different aspects to it, you know, as we kind of see in like Europe, some more like libertarian socialist countries, or more, if you go over.
Wait. Which country in Europe is libertarian socialist?
Yeah, I don't think there is one country that's like that.
I was about.
I was kind of thinking more like Sweden.
That's social democracy. That's different.
It's like
not the same thing as
FDR
libertarian
stuff.
socialism.
Yeah. And so how much of that do we incorporate?
Okay, so the idea for me, the principles involved with being able to have equal opportunity, being able to have that basic needs met, the principle of it, yes, I totally sympathize of those people who are in favor of social democracy, like in those countries in Europe that you're talking about. The question is that going to be like, do we go through that system and go through the max, and that's how we're going to get the revolution I'm talking about of no bosses? I don't know. I don't think so. I'm more thinking it's going to snap, just like a French Revolution, like all revolutions.
Kind of like a flashpoint.
Yeah, it'll be a flashpoint, like slavery. It built up and then it snapped. And same thing with feudalism. It built up and snapped. And so I think that's how I feel it's going to go. Again, I don't have a crystal ball. I just can look at history. But the principles involved with it, I agree upon. I just disagree on the as far as in Europe, the how it's done. How
they implement it.
Yeah.
I think Karen had a question when you were talking about how.
Well, I had a comment more than a question, because actually, like, I dabbled in anarchism a bit, because, like, on a moral level, strictly moral level, I feel like anarchism actually does have the high ground, because I'm against the initiation of force. And, like, it's like, if you imagine a pre-slavery world, like, people would say, like, well, what happens after slavery? It doesn't matter. It's immoral. Get rid of it.
Yeah, that's exactly
and like,
where I'm at.
And exactly, and then like what happened after you abolished slavery was actually the biggest expansion of economic growth in human history. So what happens after we abolish the state? It's like the initiation of force. People say, well, we've always had a government. How do we do without it? Doesn't matter. It's immoral. We'll see what happens on the other side. So part of me gives the moral high ground to the anarchists, because I think on a moral level they have. What would you say? Just the high ground. But on a pragmatic level, I do think human nature is prone towards
barbarism.
Barbarism, hierarchy. So like my fear is that in a post-stateless, classless society, what you're really going to have is warlords. Guy with the biggest gun, guy with the biggest muscle is basically going to take everything. Sure. How would you respond to basically that comment? The idea that like in a post-stateless world where there's no enforcement of laws or order, would you actually see order?
Yeah. So one, you would actually be in favor of more rules, because now you don't have just like one or two people who are being the supposed philosophy king. Believe me, trust me, let me tell you how smart I am. And I believe in the people themselves. And so oftentimes, just like how scientists, they don't have any bosses. There's no such thing as an expert scientist. But what they do, and you could be translated into a community, is they peer review each other. Those are oftentimes the best bosses themselves. Like I was talking about, as the coworkers and stuff, people themselves. And so I guess what your other question is about will there be a strong man that comes from it?
Yeah, there's what's from, have you seen The Walking Dead? What's his name? Negan. Yeah. What's to prevent like a Negan from basically saying, fuck you, I'm going to take what I want?
You got to have a system of accountability.
But like, what is that system without a police? Regulation. So what is the system without police?
Well, it depends. Again, well, now with the police, that's a different question for me. Now should we have police or not? I'm actually a little bit more twisted on it because my dad's a police officer, so I have a little bit of a twist on that.
But as an anarchist, how can you advocate for police?
Yeah, it's interesting for me is two things on that. But anyhow, I would go back again. That's a separate question: should you have police or not? Now, if somebody like that comes to prevent that person from rising, again, you should have a system in place where there's a welfare state or an equal opportunity for these things to not prevent it from rising in the first place, or in a system that once in a regulation and rules that if somebody does get in there, you can do a tribal council vote or something like that. I don't know. But now the other question about what you're saying about police officers is a very twisted question for me. One solution could be, and the question for in an anarchist society I'm talking about, should there be police officers? This is what I could suggest. One of the things a lot of people talk about is the state being a monopoly of force, and how just like you were talking about any monopoly, that's where corruption happens and where bad things happen.
Right.
And so is it possible that each organization has its own security force?
I can imagine
rather than a centralized one place that owns the force.
Right. I can imagine in a post-state world that like all the corporations will just hire their own security force. But that wouldn't lead towards a commune system. It would lead towards basically warlords.
But I would say so, but that would be again, what's the important thing is who's control of this. And it would be workers themselves being the security in these organizations. So they would have, maybe wear possibly an extra hat, one more hat, and maybe share that hat around if they have enough workers. Just because that's what you need to do to be able in a society like that. You got to protect yourselves. And so again, it comes back to, can you make up a system to account for that? And my simple answer is like tribal council. Like, hey, let's get a majority vote. Do we want them out? Let's get them out.
Once you vote him out, like he makes deals with other rebels and they just conquer.
So if he's out, then he has no power.
But no, you can conquer. That's my point. Like for instance, Catalonia. We go back to Catalonia. What stopped Catalonia from being a real thing? Well, the fascists were more powerful, and they conquered.
Well, and it's not just the fascists; it was the communists and the.
There was infighting within Catalonia as well.
Overwhelming. It was so overwhelming that nothing could have stopped it.
But that actually brings up, like, I asked this question earlier, and I'm curious because I really am. Because the main criticism I've heard from anarchism is that it's not scalable. For instance, like I've read psychological papers that say like human beings are not capable of making more than 50 connections, social connections with people. So how big can these communes be before they just unravel?
So again, it's like you made a really good point about 50 people in a meaningful sense.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say you could still have 50 people, have more than, maybe in your community you have more than 50 people.
But wouldn't there be infighting within that 50 group?
Well, you would have. You don't have to be buddies with everybody, but you do need to have disagreements, and then you hash that out in a meeting, that's democratic, and then you have votes. And if there's not a majority of votes, then it doesn't happen. Or not everybody agrees with it, then it doesn't happen. So infighting is always going to be a natural thing. I think in
Russia, Putin.
Yeah.
He won't tolerate any fucking infighting. That's just a joke. Sorry, I didn't mean to just derail the whole conversation there. I saw an opportunity for a joke and I seized it.
Good. I got it.
Karen the Savage.
Karen the Savage. Actually, that's an Aldous Huxley reference. Tina, you'll appreciate that.
I was actually gonna go into that question with.
I was rereading part of Brave New World earlier this morning, and I wanted to write Karen the Savage, John the Savage.
There
So, yeah.
you go.
Oh yeah, I remember that part.
Yep.
It's the guy that was like he's the I don't know, the native, right?
Yeah, he's the only
main
moral
character.
person in a world full of immorality,
Yeah.
and they consider him
Yeah.
a savage.
Yeah, they call him the savage. Yeah.
Anyways.
What do you think would be more likely that post-apocalypse here, like a Brave New World style situation where we have like all our needs met, but we in a sense take out our ability to feel human, or more like a 1984 style where the state controls everything?
That's a great question. Which dystopia is more likely?
I think we're actually living in one. There's a combination, obviously, of both of them. But like to me, if I was going to choose one or two of them, I think we're actually living in Brave New World for sure.
I'd agree.
I think we're actually living in it. We have a thing called there's 100 billion distractions in the world, and those distractions can be, oftentimes confused with hey, that's a real need, instead of calling it what it is, a distraction. And so if you have a world of distractions and you don't know what actual needs are, well, then you lost reality. And once you lose reality, that's when power can consolidate.
Easily manipulated.
Yeah, the main difference between Orwell and Huxley is that Orwell feared of a future where the state prevented us from knowing the truth, and Huxley feared a state in which we didn't care about the truth. We just
And I think, and I've heard that quote before, and I think that's exactly correct for this day and age.
And I would agree. I think that's the problem, is we have so many little comforts and distractions that no one really actually cares. It's sad. It really is.
And it is. And what's the tragic of it is technology is in and of itself inherently, it's neutral. It's whatever the person does with it, right, is what makes it good or bad. And so what the internet could be used is to really freely exchange ideas, put no opinions out, come and learn new stuff. And what it is reality, well, it's just a giant pissing contest, basically. And there's just, it's garbage in that sense. And I'm not against saying we shouldn't have any distractions at all. Life is pretty rough, man. But distraction is good every once in a while. But doing extraction and confusing that as life's purpose, it's getting ridiculous.
That's a good point. Yeah, absolutely.
You probably see it firsthand with your students and
wow,
on the phone for sure.
Yeah.
Oh wow, yeah. But no, I agree completely. You need distractions because the world is so hard that you can't basically, if you had to deal with the real hardships of the world 24/7, God damn it, because that would be a hellish life, really would. Yeah, but so you need distractions, but so people have become so numb that they're blind to reality, and they're basically just, use a phrase again, cogs in a machine. They don't care that they're basically just treading water for the rest of their lives. They don't really care that they're never going to find land.
Yeah, they don't. And a lot of them don't. And even if they do, they're so distracted with meaningful stuff, not just video games or movies and stuff.
I love video games.
Like raising a kid, raising kids.
Raising kids is not a distraction. That's the purpose of life.
Wow.
Anyway, that's a bigger discussion. Oh my God! All right.
Anyway,
all right.
But the point still stands that you have other things. You have things that are going on that they feel like they don't control and they don't have any say in. So why even bother thinking about these things if I have to put food on the table for my kids and stuff?
Yeah.
Isn't it almost like the superstructure that Marx brings up about having this kind of structure above you that acts as a distraction, but is essentially still kind of controlled by the state?
So that's an interesting question. Are these distractions being propelled by the state? Is that what you're saying?
Almost facilitated, yes.
Facilitated?
Yeah.
Well, first off, you can look at the invention of the internet. Where did that come from? Well, it didn't come from Apple. It didn't come from Microsoft. It came from the
Tim Berners-Lee.
The military. So there you go. So it comes from there. Where did for me what I was looking at? Where did some of the first sports come about? I was looking at it was college sports. Colleges are paid by the government, so that also is in play. I don't know how much of that is it, but I don't know. That's an interesting question of how much is the government involved with the distractions. I mean, after all, don't they even give money to pharmaceutical companies and they give out drugs, which distracts people? That's a great question. Are they really? How much are they facilitating distractions? And the other question for me, I would ask you is how conscious is it?
Yeah, that's the thing is, I mean, it kind of hit me when apparently like in the last year, they gave out a statistic that, Americans usually spend about 60% of their day on the internet.
God damn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that their waking day or is that including sleep?
Yeah. And waking day. And
okay.
So how,
well, that's still too much.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
And how much of that would you say is like purposeful, like, interaction on the internet, or is it just kind of like doom scrolling? And
I think again, it depends on the individual, right? Depends on the situation, the day they're feeling. But for me, from what I've seen with students when they're going on their phones, it's a way of escape from the reality that they're surrounded themselves in. So I think that oftentimes when you're on their phones and if they're having anxiety from their phones, it's not that it's their another reality is escaping from them. And reality that seems more sane and more tame in the virtual than it is here. So what does that say about here then? If they feel like they have more comfort in the virtual, well, it shows you how terrible things are here. That they forcing themselves to distract themselves from here rather than fixing it so they don't have to distract themselves as much.
That's very true.
All right. Okay, I'm going to completely ignore the whole part where family is a distraction. So
go ahead.
No. I'm really not going to get into that. It's a whole fucking long discussion. First off, I got to take another piss, unfortunately, and I got to refill my drink again. And then, what time is it?
I got all night.
Oh, okay. Tina, what are you doing?
I will have to leave at some point, but so far it doesn't look like I've been called upon.
Oh, shoot. God, sorry, there's a pop-up. Damn it. Let me take a quick piss break. I don't know if we'll continue into the hot seat right when I get back because I'm enjoying this conversation. But I got to take a quick intermission. So
yeah, me too.
Okay, everyone, all right. Take a quick...
Yeah, I'm going to take a piss break.
Everyone take a piss.
So did you have the whole weekend off?
Yeah, I actually got the whole weekend off here, but
good for you.
You're heading into the Christmas season, so
that's
really
right.
busy.
Yep. Yeah, I remember. Yeah, they would be pretty crazy selling sports memorabilia and whatnot. Next month, or even after Thanksgiving. Yeah, after Thanksgiving, especially.
Oh yeah. That weekend after Thanksgiving is usually the second or first busiest weekend of the year. Usually, and the following weekend are like the two busiest as far as like online sales.
All right. Oh shoot. Okay, where were we? Sorry. We were talking about. Tina, remind me.
We were talking about superstructures.
Yes.
And how much of that is like facilitated by the state, and then we got into the internet.
Right. No. Why is voluntarism not enough? I know that's a non sequitur. That's non sequitur because like I didn't know what to make of that. But that was a question I had written down earlier. Yes, why is voluntarism not enough? Because if you agree that what we're existing in society right now is capitalist, so there's hierarchy, but people choose all their interactions and they choose all their contracts. Why is that not enough towards achieving harmony as opposed to an anarchist society?
It's because you're infringing the rights of somebody else to be able to be as free as they can be without hurting anybody else or depriving other people's freedom. If you have, like going back to the Amazon example or the Walmart example, is that really free? If somebody, a worker like that? No. And so you can even, let me ask you this. Is somebody really free if we just drop them in the desert in any meaningful sense?
Well, I mean, they're free, but they're not going to be free for very long because they're probably going to die.
So yeah, so they're really not free. And so to
Yeah.
me, it's like, so there's two different types of freedom in the sense of like, you need to be able to like have that ability to do as much as you do anything you want, but you also got to be at the same time, do not deprive other people. And so when you are enforcing people to go to their jobs, and if they don't go and they don't play ball, they get fired and they starve. Well, that's really infringing the right on somebody else, the freedom to do other things differently.
But that actually is an argument for the social safety net. Like, how is like social democracy not a better? But how is social democracy not a better solution than a libertarian, socialist, or anarchist revolution? Because what you described there is basically what happens when a worker is, for whatever reason, they have to leave their job because it's just dreadful. There should be a social safety net to catch them.
Sure.
Right. So that's like Tina brought up Scandinavia, a social safety net. Why is a libertarian socialist country or potential country better than a social democracy?
So what you're saying is why can't so you're saying,
well, what I'm saying is like so like what you described.
I think I know what you're saying.
Okay,
you're saying is wealth. Why is there
what's the benefit?
Should there be a welfare system?
Well, no, it's more along the lines of what's the benefit of like ownership of the means of production versus just having a safety net for people who like fall through the cracks for whatever reason.
Well, just like we were saying about alienation earlier, it's that sense of fulfillment. It's good days, hard work, and feeling like I earned what I earned today. Because I don't know about you, I don't know how many hours I worked. It doesn't matter. I never feel like I earned like I was supposed to earn. And I think it has to do with the owners exploiting the workers in that sense. Now, should there be a safety net? Either way, yes, absolutely. Because I believe in the idea of a basic set of needs being met. Can that be also part of a libertarian socialist society? Yes, it can be a part of it too. And I don't think they're mutually exclusive. It's just the only difference for me would be is how those organizations are organized without any bosses. So that way you can maximize the freedom of each individual. When I mean by freedom is to be able to say as much as they want.
The economic
and actually mean it. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So that makes sense. So now we're going to talk about implementation. So now that we've defined more or less what your anarchist utopia or future, I don't want to say utopia because it seems sort of like
yeah, it's not a utopia. It's not perfect.
Yeah, it's not perfect. There's no such thing as perfection. Utopia is a myth. Paradise is lost. But like now that we've defined more or less your worldview, let's say that, what incremental steps can you take towards achieving it?
Great question. I've talked to a person about this in my podcast. One of which is he talked about a organization called the IWW, the Industrial Workers of the World. And so what he suggested some solutions is direct action. In this direct action, he's talking about examples in history. You can take a recent example in Kentucky. In Kentucky, there is around the country for the last couple of years, teachers were fighting as unions, fighting for better working pay through fighting state legislature to get better pay, and they struck. They got better pay. Well, in Kentucky, the union actually didn't want to go on strike. And so what happened is the workers themselves organized on their own, independent of their union boss, and actually called in sick. And then they got better raises from it. So it's this direct action, not waiting. So for me, it would be, what shouldn't you do? And what you shouldn't do is wait for somebody to make these decisions for you. Do it yourselves. Another example could be a sit-in. You could, if this was done in the 1930s, where factory workers, instead of going on a picket fence, they would just sit into their workspace and not do anything and clog up all the lines. This is a good tactic, I think, because it says that you're one step away from not needing your boss at all. And so those are some strategies to it. Every situation is different. You know,
think what's going on right now with the job market is kind of a sign of that, is almost kind of like silent protest to, you know, the conditions that workers were previously working in.
I think let's see. I think it's kind of independent of it. So the main thing is the reason. So your question is why are you talking about like why so many people are out of the workplace? Is that where you're going with it?
Not entering the workplace or leaving the workplace after re-entering.
Okay. I think it comes back to the alienation of it, and then the wages are so low. Like, why do I even try? But
it's not direct opposition or direct action. That
I think I think the most of us, again, they're just trying to make by, you know, because most workers, especially in the world's richest country the world has ever seen, such as the United States, where most of us are in a lot of them are in a precarious spot, and so they're just trying to make ends meet, and so. If it's so bad, if it's the ends meet that they're trying to make, it's so little. I can see why they don't even want to try anymore. And so did I answer your question? I don't know if I did. I'm trying really good, trying my best.
Yeah, I'm just seeing like if this would be like a tactic for if somehow unemployed people could get together and, you know, face the job market in a hole, you know.
Right, like a general strike. Like what would happen if there was a general strike?
Right, we're living it.
That's actually has happened. Not over the United States, but in Seattle, in around 1919, there is the whole city went on strike. I think for like 3 or 4 months. And they had it's not like they didn't have problems for those 3 or 4 months. They had problems, but they were able to manage it themselves. The only reason why it didn't like last was because the army came in and they smashed it and brought it up. And so so it can happen. You know, same thing with like slavery. There was a whole mass of like people that said like, this slavery is not a moral thing. We need to do something about it because this is a terrible thing. So it can happen, but again, going back to what would the world people would say if they're in the years leading up to slavery, what would that world look like? I don't know.
Right, exactly. It doesn't matter. It's immoral.
That's exactly where I'm at, and that's where I make the argument for working for a wage like that. It's immoral in that sense.
All right. I think we can move on to the hot seat. We got to wrap this podcast up because it's getting a little late for me, and Tina has plans later. So, by the way, say Jeremy like happy lap dance.
Okay.
I totally missed that reference.
No. That was before you got on. Like he's got a bachelor party or some shit to go to.
Me.
Well, okay, it's not a bachelor party. It's just a random
going away party.
It's a going away party. Fine, I don't care. I find the whole experience hollow. I really do. I don't like strip clubs. All right.
I don't either, but I'm going along with it. So.
I know. But before
like strippers?
I actually the last time I was at a strip club was probably my most enjoyable time.
Was that the time you and I went?
I like strippers.
Oh my god.
Good-looking strippers, anyway.
Yeah, the
But
bad-looking strippers.
Oh,
Fuck
yeah.
them.
Right.
They don't have a right to organize.
Yeah. That is actually another thing that I tried getting on my podcast was a stripper. I was trying to like talk to them and
Damn.
to get see what would happen if there was no bosses in the workplace. What would the strip club look like?
No, I don't know.
And fortunately, I couldn't get her in. She didn't want to go, but I tried really hard because I thought that would be extremely interesting.
Yeah.
I think you got a good point there.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't even know how are they like contractors or?
Are all the
Yeah, are
strippers
they
in
independent
Seattle?
contractors?
They're
Yeah,
subcontractors or something? All right. But the thing we like to do with all of our guests on our podcast, and hopefully we'll do further, before we send them out and end the podcast, we put them in the hot seat. So the basic idea of this segment is you answer the questions. There's not going to be follow-up questions. It's no long discussion. It's not necessarily that you have to answer them as fast as possible. It's just the idea that it's not going to provoke a further conversation. So you're in the hot seat. You answer them. We move on.
All right.
All right?
Sounds
Okay.
good.
Let's do it. All right. So, Austin, you're in the hot seat. So let's start off. What is something you know a lot about?
I know a bit about biology. I also know me.
All right. What is something
That's
you?
about it.
Yeah. What is something you don't know much about?
Nature of existence.
Where would you rather live, the beaches or the mountains?
I prefer the mountains. I like the I don't know. I from the Pacific Northwest. I like the mountains.
Can the problem of traffic ever be solved?
Yes, it can be solved. Yes.
Okay. I want a follow-up question to that, but I won't fucking ask it. Damn it, Tina.
I was ready for it.
I know. We should. Okay. What is your favorite curse word?
It's got to be motherfucker.
Let's go on.
Classic.
Will humanity ever do away with religion?
No, I don't think so. I think it's everybody's going to have these feelings and of things that are beyond the physical that that they're going to ascribe to religious stuff. So no, I don't think so.
Who is your favorite student and why? Don't have to give a name, but pick a student who
Yeah.
you've really liked and tell us about him.
Let's see here. Give me a half second here. Can't
There's
think of
another-
anyone that are my favorite right now, but I have a student who's particularly interesting. She's from Afghanistan and she left to Afghanistan 2 years ago.
Okay.
From Kabul.
Okay.
And I had to talk to her about, and I just met her and I asked her about what she thought about Biden pulling out of Afghanistan.
Right.
And so then I asked, she said to me that the images that they're seeing online or on newspapers or on the news in general are the same images that she's been seeing for her whole life. So it was like nothing new to her. You know, I don't know about you and what impression you got, but it seemed like the news made this a giant calamity. Like this is the worst thing that could have happened. You know, that brings a bigger philosophical point for me is like, what did you expect? What was the other alternative that was supposed to happen? For me, you can make an argument. For me is the fact that like, you know, you had 80,000 translators that are helping you and allies. I think you should have pulled them out and helped them out because they helped you scratch your bag, scratch yours. But at one point, like, what else does it look like? Like, what's your alternative? Stay there until it magically doesn't happen? Like they've been saying that for 10, 15, 20 years. And so, so my point about all this is she shed light to me about the nature of that issue there. And because originally I was on the impression, just like the news, like this is terrible and whatnot. How could you have pulled out so terribly? But then when she said, this is nothing new, this is the same old, made me think differently.
Okay. If you had I'm so sad that this is the next question because that was actually a really good answer. But if you had to have sex with a male celebrity, who would it be? It's such a fucking terrible transition. It's a
If I
terrible
had sex
transition.
with a male celebrity. Let's see.
Oh my god! All right.
Probably Chris Hemsworth.
Ooh.
I don't know.
Oh, you go for the masculine type.
Yeah, I would go for the masculine.
Jesus.
Okay.
What would you expect? Come on. All right. Is suffering necessary to produce good art?
Ooh. So suffering for me is part of life. I mean, that's how you find beauty. So that's a really interesting question. Do you need suffering or do you need art? So if you need beauty, in order to find beauty, you need suffering, and beauty can be found in art. I actually think there is a little bit of that suffering to be able to make the best art. Sure, you can make art about the greatest things. They have them in medieval stuff, and a bunch of angels and stuff like that. But they're not. So you do not need suffering for art, but the best art comes from suffering, in my opinion.
Good answer. All right. When, if ever, is ending a human life justified?
Well, it's an interesting question. There's a practical question, and then kind of an academically when I think about it. If you absolutely knew what happened, and this guy murdered 10 people, I actually feel really sympathetic on wanting to take that guy's life. This is the reality, though. We don't always know who the person killed who. 4% of the murders, the executions in this country, we get the wrong guy. And we can't replace that life. And so, in a practical sense, I'm not in favor of that because of the off chance, the 5% chance that we got the wrong guy, we can't bring him back. Yeah. Okay. So, but in principle, though, if you absolutely knew, somehow we knew for absolute certainty, I can see that. Okay. As long as they're going through a trial and everything, yeah.
All right. What is wisdom?
Shoot. I never really thought about that. Give me like 10 seconds here.
Take your time.
I see the bubbles rising.
Yeah.
Bubbles.
Wisdom for me is able to discern things that are true and not true. And not only discern it from true or not true, but then acting upon it in a rational way.
Good answer. All right. What is love?
Baby, don't hurt me.
Yes.
Don't hurt me. No more.
He answered the. No. That's good enough. You answered the question correctly. If you'd like to go further, you don't need to, but you can.
No, that's all I got. The other thing is love is just it's an emotion, and it's something that we all share, and something we need. Honestly, it's just like water.
All right. And the final question: are you right-handed or left-handed?
I'm right-handed.
All right. Okay. Great. I gotta ask every single guest on the podcast because it's important. Apparently.
How many people are left-handed?
I don't think we've got a single
left-handed
left-handed
person.
one. But it's always important to do your due diligence. Come on. Mm-hmm. All right. Mm-hmm. Okay. So anyway, I'll give you guys the chance for final thoughts. Austin, give your final thoughts about this podcast, about your whole philosophy, whatever you'd like to say before we conclude, and also tell us where we can find you.
Well, I appreciate you having me on and having these discussions. I appreciate that we share the same values. And the question is it pragmatic or not? Is it really feasible on what my beliefs are? And that's another disagreement that we may have. But I appreciate that we have, at least on principle, these thoughts we share. And so I find that really, really refreshing. But my biggest thought and takeaway from this was just that. You can find my podcast. It will be on Spotify later when I finish up all the episodes. I have about 5 more episodes that I'm going to put out, and then I'm going to release 12 of them, and then every week I'll release one more till you'll have a 25 episode playlist, and each one is like 30 to 40 minutes long. So
Nice.
they're not super long. They're just enough for a working person's commute.
Awesome.
That's
Yeah.
what I try to go for.
All right.
Like
Tina?
what you're going for.
Anything you'd like to add before we conclude?
I think we're good. It was definitely good hearing about your thoughts on anarchism, and I think the biggest discussion came with the feasibility standpoint of how it could be implemented, and I think you gave some good advice for people that would like to take up that philosophy.
Oh, thanks. It's the question is like, how do you get, like, these are great ideas and whatnot, but how do you get there? And so I think it's a combination of the masters of mankind don't want you to have these conversations, so they're actively thinking about ways to disrupt it. Matter of fact, in labor history, they have disrupted it until we fought for rights and whatnot. And so, but it's there's a lot of different steps that you could take, and it's no right or there's not a magic bullet, just like anything. So yeah, it's just a matter of getting it to the word out there.
Getting the word out.
Yeah. And I would say, with conclusion, like there's about 90% of stuff I would say that like I more or less agree with, and I would probably push back on family a bit, though. That was the one thing I didn't want to totally dive down that kind of wormhole, but like that's a whole another chapter of this podcast. So anyways, my thoughts is I appreciate this conversation, appreciate the different point of views. We have the same values. We want to see good ends. It's all good. But yeah, that's all good. And for Tina and Karen, do the tube. I'm Karen.
Comrade Tina. signing out.
Joining us with our guest, Austin.
See ya.
Yep, everyone
Austin the agitator here.
Austin the
Yes,
agitator.
The agitator. It
Yeah.
is the agitator. Yes.
So everyone stay safe and stay hydrated. We love you.
Stay beautiful, everybody.